Oh, right.
Funny how you
He's in the building, though, right?
He didn't make a shake.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
I know.
same question all the time. I have.
Because I make right wait on the light. No, right, don't even go there. Right by itself. Oh, right. Right. How'd you know about blue shirt tissue? Shit. I'm gonna put on my best battery.
Oh, that's right.
Be sure to step back. What? charge of count 1, conspiracy to commit homicide, murder first degree premeditated, count 2, solicitation of a homicide, solicitation of murder, count 3, homicide, murder first degree premeditated, count 4, obstruction of justice, count 5, witnesses, bribing, intimidating, interfering with criminal case, punishable by more than 10 years, count 6, perjury, subordination other than court proceeding. Appearances for the record.
Good morning, Your Honor. Lisa Lindsay on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan.
Good morning, Your Honor. May it please the court, Robert Moran, Assistant Prosecutor.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mark Hindelang on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mark Proceed on behalf of Mr. Bashara. With Renee Cooper.
I'd like to first thank everyone for arriving timely. As you all promised, this we need to get the message to the sheriff, transport Mr. Bashara. Transport Mr. Bashara. All right. Are you ready to proceed?
Your Honor, before we begin, there are two preliminary matters I'd like to bring to the court's attention.
Okay.
First, I was advised yesterday that in violation of the court's order, on a number of occasions there were some broadcasts of witnesses' faces. Particularly when they were sitting down in the chair or walking up to the podium, the faces were shown. I'd ask the court to admonish the media not to broadcast the faces of any of them. I was advised yesterday that in violation of the court's order, on a number of occasions there were some broadcasts of witnesses' faces. Particularly when they were sitting down in the chair or walking up to the podium, the faces were shown. I'd ask the court to admonish the media not to broadcast the faces of any of the witnesses who testified.
Did you see that yourself?
I did not, but it was brought to my attention by a member of my staff.
I didn't see it.
Okay.
Somebody else see it?
I did.
Do you know what channel?
I do not.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the media, please be careful not to show any of the faces of the witnesses. Otherwise, I'll have to take whatever measures necessary to ensure that it doesn't happen. Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. And secondly, I advised counsel this morning that at the end of the proofs, we intend to ask the court to add a count of felony firearm relating to two counts: the murder first degree and the conspiracy to commit first degree murder.
You've been placed on notice, Judge.
All right.
Thank you.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
With the court's permission, we'd like to call Dr. Diaz as our first witness for today.
Dr.
Diaz?
Yeah.
My name is Dr. Francisco Diaz. First name F-R-A-N-C-I-S-C-O, and last name Diaz and David, I-A-Z like zebra.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Please give your name for the record.
My name is Dr. Francisco Diaz,
And are you employed?
I am an assistant medical examiner for the Office of the Medical Examiner here in Wayne County.
And Your Honor, at this time, I believe the defense is going to stipulate to Dr. Diaz's qualifications as an expert in forensic pathology.
That is correct.
All right. The court will receive that stipulation for exam purposes only. You may proceed.
Dr. Diaz, on January 26, 2012, did you conduct an autopsy on the body of Jane Bashara?
I did.
And did you reduce your findings and publish them in a report?
I did.
Is that report given Wayne County Medical Examiner Office case number 12-0939?
Yes.
And during the course of the autopsy, did you take pictures?
I did.
Your Honor, I believe to move to admit the exhibits, and I have a stipulation for them to come in. The following exhibits are 12 through 19.
Yeah, we have stipulated.
All right. Proceed.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, may I approach the bench? Dr. Diaz, I want to direct your attention to what's marked as Exhibit 12. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a copy of the autopsy report.
And that's a report that you put together and that you signed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you able to determine a cause and manner of death of Mrs. Bashara?
Yes.
What was the cause of death?
The cause of death was a strangulation.
And manner?
The manner of death was classified as homicide.
And as you did the examination of an autopsy, did you encounter any other injuries?
Yeah, she had a constellation of injuries, mainly on her head, her face, and her neck, and the upper portion of her chest.
And were you able to determine the cause of those injuries?
The cause of those injuries were the combination of a strangulation, and that's the reason she died, but also there was a component of blunt trauma that was mainly localized to the head area and bleeding into the coverings of the brain, as well as blunt trauma into the upper chest.
Now, I know this is an exam and we're in front of an experienced judge, but can you briefly describe the process of an autopsy?
Certainly. An autopsy is first the external examination of the body. And you're looking for evidence of injury, evidence of external signs of disease, and documenting those findings if pertinent. And the internal examination consists of the systematic dissection of each and every organ. If there is an injury, following the path of that injury, or what organs or anatomic structures those injuries damage, and if there is evidence of disease, finding what disease was.
So there's an external examination and an internal examination. Is that correct?
Correct.
I want to draw your attention to what's marked as People's 13. Can you describe what that is?
People's 13 is a picture taken that disclosed the fingers of the decedent, Mrs. Bashara, and it shows a slightly torn nail on the middle finger of the right hand.
And did you note that in your report as well?
I did.
What did you do after you reported that? You made note of that.
I made note of that, and during the process of the post-mortem examination, the nails were trimmed and submitted for evidence.
And that's a standard procedure?
It is.
You mentioned blunt trauma, and I would like to draw your attention to Exhibit 14. Can you describe the blunt trauma that's evidence there?
Well, on Exhibit 14, what we have is a photograph of the face of the decedent on the left side. And it shows a combination of not only of blunt trauma, but evidence of the strangulation. The first, or the most prominent injury is a very large abrasion with a hematoma. And a hematoma is the medical term for a bruise. And that bruise with abrasion goes from approximately the left ear all the way to the left chin, covering an area of approximately 6 1/4 of an inch. She also had on this, depicted on this photograph, an abrasion, again measuring more than 3 inches, that covers the left side of her neck. And on the picture is also depicted evidence of blunt trauma on the upper portions of her chest, where the chest meets the shoulders, and is characterized by extensive bruising in that area, in the anterior bilateral shoulders.
And are you able to tell through your examination if this was one strike or multiple strikes that caused these injuries?
By the extent and the location and the physical characteristics of those injuries, those are multiple instances of injury.
I want to draw your attention to People's 15. Is there evidence of blunt trauma in that photo?
What we have in this photograph is the side profile on the right of the decedent, Mrs. Bashara, and it discloses a roughly rectangular abrasion on the right chin area. It also, apart from that, it is worth of note that the 3/4 of her face is suffused. That means, I'm going to spell that, SUFFUSED. What that means is congested by accumulation of blood underneath the skin. And there is a clear line of demarcation characterized by the area of congestion, which is dark purple, and the area that is the natural color of her skin. And 3/4 of the right side of the face are composed of that area of congestion with an area of demarcation by the area that is not congested.
And what does that area or that line of demarcation, that suffusion, mean to you?
What that means is that the area that is congested, that is blood that couldn't circulate. And it is obvious that the blood circulation was stopped at that point. And from that point up, all the blood is accumulated underneath the skin.
So there's something along that line that's blocking the blood flow?
Yes.
Turning to People 16, can you describe what's in People 16?
People 16 is a difficult picture from the standpoint of anatomy, and I'm going to put it in a perpendicular way. What I depicted while taking this picture is the main injury that the decedent sustained. That means that her trachea was crushed, and you can see it in the picture where it shows an area where there is a defect. In other words, there is a hole in the trachea. The trachea is the windpipe, so the windpipe was broken, crushed.
Is a windpipe easily crushed, or does it require force?
It requires a significant amount of force because the trachea or windpipe is composed mainly of cartilage, which is a more yielding tissue than bone, for example.
Does Exhibit 16 have any evidence of blunt trauma?
It has evidence of blunt trauma. As you can see in the picture, what the picture depicts is the dissection of the neck. And for that, I reflected the skin and lifted up. And it also exposes the area in the upper anterior shoulders where, if you remember, there was bruising there. The external bruises also correspond with internal bruising in the soft tissues and muscles of the upper chest and anterior shoulder.
And that's what you noted in your report as hemorrhaging. Is that correct?
Right, correct.
Turning to People's Exhibit 17, can you describe what we're looking at in that photo?
Exhibit marked as number 17 is the depiction of the scalp after being reflected. What that means is during the autopsy we make an incision on the scalp from one side to the other of the scalp, and basically we retract the tissue to expose the skin underneath it, and as well as to expose the cranial cavity.
Can you show the judge with your own head what area of the head is shown in this picture?
It's the entirety of the head. Basically, we make an incision and we retract the skin on both sides. And basically that exposes all the soft tissue and the bone underneath. And basically when we do that, we're looking for evidence of injury and the location of those injuries and so on.
And did you find evidence of injury?
Yes.
Is that evidence shown in the picture?
Yes.
Can you describe it, please?
She had a diffuse, what is medically called subgaleal hematoma, and I'm going to spell that, S-U-B as in boy, dash G-A-L-E-A-L, and that is bleeding on the tissues of the scalp inside. And it is diffuse in the sense that it goes from the front to the back.
And are you able to determine if this is from one incidence of trauma or many?
In my opinion, based on my experience, this is more than one instance of blunt trauma. If you allow me to use myself as an example,
Please.
if you hit somebody in the head with your fist, well, the area of bleeding into that will be a reflection of the size of that fist, roughly. Could be smaller, could be slightly larger. But in this instance, we have the whole tissue underneath the scalp that is profusely bleeding.
And that indicates to you that it had to be multiple blows?
Yes.
Turning your attention.
Interrupt just for a second.
Yes.
Doctor, in this exhibit, would the front of the head be to the right of the patient? Would that be the forehead area?
You're correct, Your Honor. You're absolutely correct.
Turning your attention to People's 18. Can you tell us what we're looking at?
The exhibit marked as number 18 is a photograph of the brain just after the autopsy.
And was there anything that indicated trauma to you?
As you can see in the picture, there is diffuse bleeding into the coverings of the brain, and that is called subarachnoid hemorrhage. Subarachnoid. I'm going to spell it S-U-B as in boy, dash, A-R-A-C-H-N-O-I-D as in David. And that is the tissue that wraps around the brain. There is extensive bleeding, and as you can see in the picture, it's more prominent on the right side of the brain, and more specifically, is more prominent on the right parietal area of the brain.
Can you please spell parietal?
Yes, P as in Peter, A-R-I-E-T-A-L.
And what does the presence of that hemorrhage indicate to you?
That indicates blunt trauma.
So you mentioned that in addition to all the blunt trauma that all the evidence of blunt trauma that you've just described, that there was also evidence of strangulation.
Yes.
Can you, beginning with People 16, just remind us what People 16 shows in terms of the strangulation?
Yes. If you have no problem, I would like to start with the picture labeled as Exhibit 1515.
Yes, please.
And because that's a sign of asphyxia or strangulation, and which is the congestion of a significant portion of the face with a line of demarcation between the area of congestion and the area of non-congestion. Going specifically to your question, the evidence of strangulation is, first and foremost, is the reason why this lady died, which is that her windpipe was crushed. And that basically precludes the air or oxygen getting into her lungs, because the tube, to use a vulgar term, that carries that air with oxygen no longer works. So for that reason, she will asphyxiate. But apart from the suffusion and the crushing of the trachea, she had her voice box was disclosed multiple areas of bleeding. And she also had a fracture of the cartilage that holds together some structures of the neck. And there are a lot of muscles in the neck that basically holds our neck together and the structures that go with it. And a lot of those muscles disclose significant bleeding. And apart from all that, inside the neck there are several organs, such as the thyroid gland, that also disclose significant bleeding into it. So the combination of all those factors, namely the congestion, the crushing of the trachea, and the extensive bleeding into the voice box and into the muscles that hold the neck together, as well as the internal organs in the neck, all those are evidence of that this lady suffered strangulation.
So, could you give us the definition? What is strangulation?
Strangulation is the lack of oxygen reaching the brain, either by the obstruction, could be a manual obstruction, or could be obstruction by an object, or a combination, or could be the use of a ligature.
And what is a ligature?
A ligature is, for example, a cord.
You also mentioned another word, asphyxia. Can you tell us what that is?
Asphyxia is the mechanism. That's the reason this lady died. After sustaining all those injuries to her neck, oxygen was not able to reach her lungs, and for that reason, oxygen was not able to reach the brain.
So you mentioned that the cartilage of the trachea was cracked. There was another piece of cartilage that was also fractured. And can you see any of those in people 16?
On people 16, if memory serves me well, and I'm looking at the pictures, it's only the depiction of the trachea.
Did you observe any indication of asphyxia when you looked at Ms. Bashara's eyes?
Yes. She had multiple petechia, and I'm going to spell that, P as in Peter, E-T-I-C-H-A-E, and that is pinpoint bleeding into, for example, the fine skin of the face. When a person is subjected to differences in pressure, as in a strangulation, where the neck is being held by a force, then the blood vessels, the small blood vessels of the skin tend to burst, and they create pinpoint bleeding, and that's called petechia. She had florid petechia on both sides of her face, as well as in both eyes. And if you remember from the picture of her voice box, she also had multiple petechia in the voice box as well. All those are signs of asphyxia. That means pressure was applied to that area that created those blood vessels, small blood vessels, to burst.
You mentioned that petechia were visible in her voice box as well. I want to draw your attention to people's 19.
Yes.
Can you tell us what's depicted in people's 19?
People 19 is a view of the larynx, and I'm going to spell that L-A-N-R-Y-N-X, and the common name for it is voice box, and as you can see, the upper portion of it discloses multiple pinpoint hemorrhages, and the uppermost portion has confluent bleeding into it. Confluent bleeding.
With the evidence of asphyxiation that you've just mentioned, can you tell us whether this was a quick and painless death?
It wasn't, and we all have the stereotype in movies where somebody gets shot and dies instantaneously. In real life, that doesn't happen. In this particular case, how long did it take for her to die? I believe it was it wasn't an instantaneous death. She didn't die right away. How long it took? It took as long as she didn't have any more oxygen on her brain. As you can see from the picture on the trachea, the air was leaking from there, so it's not getting there. How long does that take? 3-4 minutes. And you can see from also the pictures that she has extensive trauma going all the way from her upper chest all the way to the top of the head. So those are multiple instances of trauma, which also do not happen in an instantaneous manner. So she died after not getting more oxygen at some point, but it wasn't instantaneous, and that depends on what your definition of quick is.
So once her trachea was cracked, she was struggling to breathe.
Absolutely.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Excuse me one moment.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Counsel.
Doctor, can you remind me what the cause of death was
Strangulation,
and manner?
classified as homicide.
And can you tell me what homicide means in the medical context?
In the medical examiner context, by statute of the state of Michigan, the medical examiner has to classify the manner of death. The cause of death is why the person dies. Heart attack, that is the cause of death. Strangulation, that's the cause of death. The manner of death is how that death comes about. And by statute, we have 5 choices. A death could be classified as natural. The example I gave you previously, a heart attack, the manner of death will be classified as natural. The death could be the result of a motor vehicular collision. Therefore, the manner of death will be classified as accident. The manner of death could come as a result of a self-inflicted wound. In that case, will be classified as suicide. Sometimes we are not able to determine, and the manner of death is classified as undetermined. And finally, when death occurs as a result of the action of other or others, the manner of death is classified as homicide for the purposes of public health statistics.
Thank you. And, Your Honor, just to make sure I cover my bases, Peoples 12 is admitted, moving to admit Peoples 12 under the business records exemption and also by stipulation, and then 13 through 19 by stipulation.
With no objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Once again, good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Counselor.
Doctor, you prepared a report at the same time you were performing, or you dictated notes while you were performing the autopsy, correct?
Right. I took notes, and then the report was typed in later.
And you prepared the ME report that you have already referred to?
Yes.
That report, was your work peer-reviewed at any time?
Yes.
And who was it that you submitted your work for review?
The Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Carl Schmidt.
Were there any changes to the report after you submitted it to the Chief Medical Examiner?
Stylistically, obviously you can tell from my accent, English is not my native language, and it's Dr. Schmidt's native language, so I always like to submit my reports to him for that particular reason, but not in the substance of the report.
Okay. Did you review that report either today or yesterday in preparation of your testimony today?
I did. Yes.
Did you find anything in that report that you take issue with or that you would consider to be inaccurate?
No.
Now, sir, I would like to direct your attention to Exhibit 17. You made some comments when the prosecutor was asking you questions.
Yes.
And you indicated to the prosecutor that looking at the tissue underneath the scalp, you're able to tell that there were multiple blows to the head. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you be a little more definite about the term multiple?
I can't, for one simple reason. As you can see in the picture, there is a diffuse area of bleeding. If you remember my testimony, What I said was that in my experience, that amount of bleeding and the extent of the bleeding that goes from the front to the back has to occur in more than one instance of trauma.
Okay, so you can, but you can agree there were multiple means more than one.
Correct.
And you're telling us that you can't tell with any certainty how many actual blows there were to the head.
Correct.
But you're certain that there were multiple blows.
Correct.
Now, you also indicated on 18 that you're able to tell the same information on Exhibit 18?
If you give me 1 second to go to 18.
Well, and while you're looking for that, I'm going to back up for just a minute. The type of blows that you were able to observe in Exhibit 17, again, that when we talk about blunt force trauma, that's a significant amount of force with each one of those blows, correct? However many.
It is indeed, yes.
And you talked about a fist to the head?
I used that as an example, not that it happened in this case.
I'm sorry?
I used my fist as an example for illustration purposes.
But we don't know, certainly, what caused that blunt force trauma.
We don't.
Could be a fist, could be a weapon of some sort.
Could be any object.
Okay. All we know is that there is a significant amount of force, and you're able to tell that from looking at both Exhibit 17 and 18, correct?
Correct.
And Exhibit 18 gives you no additional information about how many blows were suffered by Mrs. Bashara, correct?
It doesn't, no. You're correct.
Again, we can only tell that there were, in fact, quote, multiple blows.
Correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. On direct, you mentioned fingernail clippings, and you said that it was a standard practice. Did you take clippings from both the left and the right hands?
Yes.
And where do those go after they leave your office?
Those were given to the liaison of the Detroit Police Department.
Okay. And why do you take fingernail clippings?
Fingernail clippings, at the medical examiner, we take it just for transfer to for example, the Detroit Police Department works with Michigan State Police Crime Lab, and they are analyzed for evidence such as DNA, for example. But it's not done at the medical examiner's office.
So there could be evidence under the fingernails?
That could be, but it's not the purview of the medical examiner.
Okay. But you preserve that evidence so it can be tested later?
Correct.
Mr. Presida asked you if you could determine the exact number of blows, and you said that you couldn't.
Correct.
But there were multiple blows.
In my opinion, yes.
Multiple blows with, to use Mr. Presida's word, significant force to the head?
Indeed, yes.
To the chest?
Indeed, yes.
And in fact, significant enough force to crack the trachea?
There was significant force, as you could tell from all the injuries that I described already on the neck and the head.
And you can't determine what was used to create those blows, can you?
I cannot tell you beyond a reasonable degree of medical certainty, no.
And so you don't know if the blows were caused by a fist?
No.
Or some type of weapon or tool?
No.
Would it be consistent if it was caused by a boot?
I cannot rule that out, but it's one example out of many, but I cannot tell you if a boot was used, and I cannot tell you that beyond a reasonable degree of medical certainty. That's a possibility.
But it is a possibility that the blow to the trachea was caused by a boot?
It is, yes.
And Mr. Presida also asked you about any changes to the report. In the changes that you and Dr. Schmidt went over and during the review, the standard review, did the cause of death ever change from asphyxiation?
No.
And did the manner of death ever change from homicide?
No.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Nothing additional.
Thank you, Doctor. You may start.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sir, please give your name and spelling to the court reporter this evening.
I will do that. Stan Brew, B-R-U-E.
Please raise your right hand, sir. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
You may begin when you're ready.
Sir, could you state your name for the record?
Stan Brew.
And where are you employed?
I'm a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF,
And how long have you been employed with the ATF?
for 25 years.
And as part of your duties at ATF, have you taken on the specialty of forensic cellular phone call detail analysis and tower mapping?
Yes, ma'am. Currently, I'm embedded with the Detroit Police Department's Homicide Task Force
And how long have you been embedded with the task force?
since November of 2010.
And as part of your duties at that task force to assist Detroit police and other police agencies with the evaluation and the acquisition of cell phone records for forensic analysis.
Yes, ma'am.
And have you done that in this case?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, I've spoken to defense counsel concerning his qualifications in the area of forensic cell phone. So, let me slow down. I've spoken to defense counsel concerning this witness's qualifications in the field of forensic cellular call detail record analysis and tower mapping, and they have agreed to stipulate to his qualifications as expert in this area.
For exam purposes only, that's true.
All right. The court will receive that stipulation.
Now, briefly, in order to evaluate cell phone records, do you first have to get either a court order or a search warrant to obtain the records?
Absolutely.
And that has to be signed by a judge?
Without question.
Okay. And once those records are obtained, what do you do with them?
I take the raw records or the records that are sent to me by the phone company. That's usually in an electronic form, a TXT file or Excel document. I then import that into software that I utilize. That software is called Penlink, P-E-N-L-I-N-K. Importing those records into Penlink allows me to view it in a much more discernible manner than it comes to me from the phone companies, and also allows me to query those records in any way that may facilitate and aid the investigation.
In January of 2000, on or about January 25th, 2012, did you begin to collect cell phone records?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
What was the approximate number of cell phone records and data that you evaluated?
By the end of the investigation, it was in excess of 259,000 individual call records.
And did those call records deal with the cellular phone of Mr. Robert Bashara?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
As his landline and other phone lines being used by Mr. Bashara?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, let's go for the general overview of his phone use analysis. As a target date, did you start from the target date of August 1st, 2011 through January 21st of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're using Mr. Bashara's Verizon cell phone. How many calls were placed and received?
I'd have to refer to my report that I prepared,
Please do.
if I may do so.
Would that refresh your recollection?
Absolutely. From August 1st, 2011 through January 31st, 2012, the Robert Bashara's Verizon cell phone number 313-67.
Okay.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Okay. They will stipulate to
Yes.
the cell phone number, and basically what we should do for purposes of privacy, we will introduce the reports with the full numbers in it so they won't be published. Is that?
That's appropriate.
So for the purpose of the exam, Your Honor, we're moving to introduce People's Exhibit 23, which is the complete report of this detective.
Noted and received.
So as it relates to Mr. Bashara's cell phone number, could you give me the top 4 people he called during this time frame?
Yes, during the 184 days that I examined those records, the the most frequent caller was a phone associated with Robert Fick. The second most prevalent caller was a phone associated with Rachel Gillette.
Now, let's go back to Mr. Robert Fick. How many total calls were made between the phones of Robert Fick and Mr. Bashara?
From August 1st of 2011 through January 28th of 2012, there were 652 calls.
Now, the next most prominent caller was to Rachel Gillette.
From September 27th of 2011 through January 30th of 2012, there were 574 calls.
Who was the next person he called, or the next prominent contact?
Yep. Number 3 on the top frequency list from August 1st, 2011 to January 24th, 2012, there were 550 calls to Jane Bashara.
And lastly, for the top 4, who was the next person that received the most phone traffic with Mr. Bashara's phone?
The next most frequent caller from September 27th, 2011 through January 29th of 2012, there were 472 calls to Joe Gentz.
Now, we've already discussed there's a certain phone number associated with Rachel Gillette. Did you uncover other phone numbers associated with Rachel Gillette?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a phone number, the 313, and the next 3 digits, 452.
Yes, ma'am.
How many calls were made to that number?
From August 1st, 2011 through January 30th, 2012, 249 calls were made to the number that you just listed.
Referenced. And was there a work number associated with Miss Rachel Gillette?
There was an office number associated with Rachel Gillette.
And give me the time frames and the total number of calls.
From November 15th, 2011 through January 25th of 2012, there were 203 calls to the number identified as Rachel Gillette's office phone.
Okay. Now the numbers we have just talked about are Mr. Bashara's cell phone numbers. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Now, you had access to the records from his landline.
I did.
And did you likewise evaluate the landline calls?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And did you add the landline calls, contacts from Mr. Bashara's home phone to numbers that we've already spoken of?
Yes, I have.
For the same time span?
Yes.
Well, let's start with, and does the numbers of contacts, let me reformulate that question. Initially, the number 1 caller we had when we first talked, when we were just talking about the cell phone, was to Fick. Is that correct?
Correct, Robert
Did
Fick.
that change once you combined all the other phone numbers in play?
Yes, it did.
Now, who is the person who had the most phone traffic with Mr. Bashara during that relevant time period?
Yeah, upon combining Mr. Bashara's cell phone and home phone, the 4 individuals that he interacted with most frequently, the top or most frequent caller was Rachel Gillette, and the total was 1,026 calls.
The next?
The second most frequent caller were 775 calls to Jane Bashara's cell phone and the Bashara home phone.
The next?
The third most frequent caller was 652 calls to Robert Fick.
And lastly?
Lastly was the 4th most frequent caller, 472 calls to Joe Gentz.
Now, that number didn't change. Is that correct?
It did not. His place in the ranking, if you will, did not change.
Now, based on that evaluation, can you say that Bob Bashara only used his cell phone that the only contact between Bob Bashara and Joe Gentz was through the cell phone?
The only contact.
It's a phone-to-phone communication.
Well,
We don't know who's on the end of either phone.
Well, I'll rephrase it. The phone-to-phone contact between the cell phones, there was never any other type of phone contact from Mr. Bashara's other phones to Joe Gentz's cell phone. Is that correct?
No, ma'am. From August 1st of 2011 through January 31st of 2012, there was no contact between the cell phone associated with Joe Gentz and the home phone associated with the Bashara home.
Now, as it relates to the records you evaluated, did you evaluate any records relating to Mr. Stephen Tavato, Mr. Joe Gentz and Mr. Bashara to find any type of connection or pattern?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. And could you tell me about that?
Absolutely. My analysis revealed that Gentz and Robert Bashara first had telephonic contact on September 27th, or there was contact between their phones.
Now, I'm going to stop you there.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm handing you now what's been marked as Exhibit 24. I believe counsel will stipulate to Exhibit 24.
That's
For
correct.
exam purposes only. Proceed.
Could you tell us about the contact between the cell phones?
Yes, ma'am. People's 24 reflects the first contact between cell phones associated with Joe Gentz and the cell phone associated with Robert Bashara. That contact occurring on September 27th, 2011 at 6:45 p.m.
Okay, now can you explain how the phone number of Mr. Tabatato comes into play on this?
Absolutely. Prior to this contact, there are calls, and referring back to People's 23,
First of all, let's put it in context. What date are we talking?
September 27th, 2011.
Okay, now go ahead.
Okay. On September 27th, 2011, there was a sequence of 3 calls from Stephen Tabatato and Joe Gentz. Those calls were at 6:29 p.m., 6:30 p.m., and 6:34 p.m.
Then what happens?
Then, after Gentz then makes an outgoing call to Stephen Tabatato again at 6:42 p.m. for almost 3 minutes. Within 1 minute of this call, Gentz makes an outgoing call to the phone associated to Robert Bashara, the Verizon cell phone, at 6:45 p.m. This call lasts just over 1 minute.
Then what's the next call activity?
Just over 2 minutes after the end of that call, and after checking his voicemail, the phone associated with Joe Gentz makes an outgoing call to Stephen Tabatato at 6:49 p.m. This call lasts just over 4 minutes.
And what happens after that?
The outgoing call from Gentz to Bashara at 6:45 was the first contact between those 2 phones in the time that records were analyzed, going back to August 1st, 2011. Later on, the first time that the phone associated with Robert Bashara contacted the phone associated with Joe Gentz, that did occur on September 27th, 2011 at 8:45 p.m., or excuse me, 8:27 p.m.
And how long was that phone contact?
That phone contact was roughly 15 seconds.
Now, after this initial contact in September, did there emerge a significant contact between the phones associated with the cell phones associated with Mr. Bashara and Mr. Gentz? Was there significant contact between those phones?
Without question.
Okay. And let's do a month-by-month breakdown.
Okay.
And Exhibit 29, please. And actually, 29 you can see on the screen. And I believe counsel has stipulated 29 also.
That's true.
Let's start with September of 2011.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yes, September 2011.
Yes, ma'am. In September of 2011, again, beginning with the calls on September 27th, there were a total of, for the remainder of the month, 9 calls between the cell phones associated with Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz. Bashara initiated 3 of those calls, while Joe Gentz initiated 6 of the calls.
October 2011.
In October of 2011, there were 147 calls between these 2 cell phones, the phones associated with Robert Bashara and the phones associated with Joe Gentz. Mr. Bashara initiated 55 of these calls, while Joe Gentz initiated 92 of the calls.
So there was a significant jump from September to October.
Without question.
And does the number rise in November?
It does rise. In November of 2011, there were 152 calls between the cell phones of Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz. Mr. Bashara initiated 65 of the calls, while Mr. Gentz initiated 87 of the calls.
Now, is there a drop-off in December?
There is a drop in December. In December, there were 62 calls between these two cell phones of Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz. Mr. Bashara initiated 20 of the calls, while Joe Gentz initiated 42 of the calls.
In January, does the number go back up?
It does go back up in January of 2012. There were 102 calls between the cell phones of Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz. Mr. Bashara, in a change of the pattern, a drastic alteration of the pattern, Mr. Bashara called Joe Gentz 62 times in January, while Mr. Gentz only initiated 35 of the calls.
Okay. Now let me explore what you just said. For all the months leading up to January 2012, Mr. Gentz's phone was initiating to Mr. Bashara's cell phone more.
By far.
In January, there was a change.
There was a drastic change in January.
Mr. Bashara's cell phone begins to initiate to Joe Gentz's phone more.
Absolutely.
Okay. Of the 102 calls between Bashara, the phones Bashara and Gentz, how many occurred between 121 and 124?
Of those 102 calls, there were 36 of them occurred between January 21st and January 24th of 2012.
And of those 36 calls, who called who more?
Of the 36 calls during that time frame, Robert Bashara called Joe Gentz 33 times, while Gentz only called Bashara 3 times.
During this 4-day period?
During that 4-day period, absolutely.
And would it be safe to say that this was the weekend before the murder?
This was the 4 days or the 3 days leading up to the murder, absolutely.
And over that 4-day weekend, Mr. Bashara initiated 33 times to Mr. Gentz?
33 calls, yes, ma'am.
Let's take it basically day by day.
All right.
On the 21st.
On Saturday, January 21st, 2012, there were 3 calls between Bashara and Gentz. These calls occurred between 10:29 a.m.
And I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like you to refer to 26, Exhibit 26.
Okay.
I'm handed. Counsel will stipulate to the introduction of 26, so
Yes.
you can pull out your 26.
Receive.
Thank you.
Let's start on January 21st.
Okay. On January 21st, People's 26 reflects 3 calls on January 21st. Of those 3 calls, Robert Bashara placed 2 of them to Joe Gentz, while Joe Gentz called Robert Bashara once.
Sunday, January 22nd.
On January 22nd, there are 4 calls between Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz.
And who initiated the calls?
Robert Bashara initiated all 4 calls on January 22nd.
Let's go to Monday, January 23rd.
On January 23rd, there were 23 calls between Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz.
And could you tell me what is the time span of these calls?
These calls occurred between 7:37 a.m. and 11:06 p.m. on January 23rd, the day before the homicide.
Who initiated the most calls?
Robert Bashara initiated all 23 calls on January 23rd to Joe Gentz.
Okay. So on the day before the murder, there were 23 calls.
Yes, ma'am.
Gentz initiated none of the calls.
He did not.
Bashara initiated all of the calls.
Each and every one.
The day before the murder.
Absolutely.
What was the last call at night placed from Mr. Bashara's cell phone?
The last call on Mr. Bashara's cell phone on January 23rd was at 11:06 p.m. That call was to Joe Gentz's cell phone.
The first call that Mr. Bashara's cell phone made on January 23rd, the day before the murder, who was that phone call to?
The first call on January 23rd?
Yes.
first call on January 23rd was also to Joseph Gentz.
Now, were there a certain number? Let me strike that. Were there a certain amount of calls placed between 7:37 a.m. and 7:55 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am. On January 23rd, the first 8 calls on January 23rd made by Mr. Bashara's cell phone were all to Joseph Gentz. Those calls occurred between 7:37 a.m. and 7:55 a.m. on the 23rd, the day before the homicide.
And as far as you can tell, strike that. Let's go to January 24th, the day of the actual homicide.
Yes, ma'am.
How many calls occurred on this day?
There were 7 calls between Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz on January 24th.
And who initiated the majority of the calls?
Bashara initiated or made 5 of these calls to Joe Gentz.
Out of a total of 7?
Out of 7. 5 out of 7 were from Bashara to Gentz.
And the first call in the morning made from Mr. Bashara's cell phone, what was that? Who was that call to?
Yep.
Whose cell phone?
On January 21st, actually the first 4 calls made by Robert Bashara's cell phone were to 3 calls to Joe Gentz and 1 call to Rachel Gillette's home.
You said on January 21st?
24th, the day of the homicide.
That's the day of the homicide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said the first 4 calls again were?
The first 4 calls were to Joe Gentz and to Rachel Gillette's home phone.
So there were 3 calls in succession.
Yes.
To Joseph Gentz with no break.
Correct.
And then the next call after speaking to Joseph Gentz was a call to Rachel Gillette's home?
Yes, ma'am. All 4 of these calls occurred between 6:24 a.m. and 7:36 a.m. on January 24th.
Now, is there something significant about the timing of these calls being in the early morning hours?
Absolutely. On January 24th, as I said, the 3 calls to Joe Gentz occurred in the hours between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. Of the 210 calls that Robert Bashara made to Joe Gentz's phone, all with his Verizon phone, of those 210 calls, none of them were made prior to 8 a.m. The only calls made prior to 8 a.m. to Joe Gentz's phone by Mr. Bashara's phone was on January 24th.
Okay, you said, let me strike that. I'm not processing what you said.
Okay.
There were 210 calls total between the phones.
Correct.
Okay. And of the 210 calls, only 10 were made prior to 8 a.m., correct?
Correct. Robert Bashara made 210 outgoing calls to Gentz's cell phone.
Okay.
Of those 210 calls, only 10 were made prior to 8 a.m.
And the 10, were they all made on the 23rd and 24th
yes,
of January?
Yes, ma'am. Of those 10 calls, all of those 10 were made on the 23rd and the 24th.
The day of and the day before the murder.
Correct.
And that is a significant difference in the calling pattern.
Absolutely.
Now, the murder happens on the 24th.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go to the 25th.
Okay.
What happens to the call pattern on the 25th?
It essentially stops. It changes again dramatically.
And tell me about that.
From January 25th through January 30th, there were only 12 calls between Joe Gentz and Robert Bashara's cell phones.
And what happens?
Yep, 10 of these calls were initiated by Joe Gentz. 10 of the 12 were initiated by Joe Gentz. And during this time, Bashara, of course, then placed the other 2 calls.
Okay. So the pattern after the murder goes back to what it was
prior to the murder.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, is there phone contact between Mr. Gentz and Mr. Bashara on the 25th?
Yes, ma'am, there is.
And approximately what time did that phone contact take place?
On January 25th at 3:40 p.m., Joe Gentz calls Robert Bashara's Verizon phone.
And how long was the duration of that call?
This call lasted just over a minute.
And was there something significant on January 26th?
Yes, on January 26th, Joe Gentz received a call from the cell phone, the Verizon cell phone that is associated with Nancy Bashara.
And how long was this duration of this phone call?
This call lasted 1 minute and 22 seconds.
And what is significant about this call?
This call on January 26, 2012 was the only instance that Nancy Bashara's Verizon phone was in contact with Joe Gentz's phone.
And this happened after the murder?
This happened after the homicide.
Never before the murder did Nancy Bashara's cell phone make contact with the cell phone of Gentz's?
Absolutely not.
And is there phone contact on 129 between Bashara's cell phone and Gentz's cell phone?
Yes, ma'am, there is.
Could you tell me about that?
On January 29, 2012, at 1:57 p.m., the phone associated with Robert Bashara called Joe Gentz's cell phone. This call lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds.
Now, while you were evaluating the call detail records of Mr. Bashara, did you ever identify any times where his cell phone, when I say his cell phone, I mean Mr. Bashara's cell phone, used cell towers that were not in the state of Michigan?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Could you tell me about that?
There were two of these instances, and they occurred from December 26th of 2011 to January 2nd of 2012. During 4 calls with Joe Gentz, the records that I examined indicate that Robert Bashara's cell phone were utilizing towers in the Columbia, South Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia markets. Not necessarily those cities, but those markets.
Okay. And did you identify some calls in January?
Yes, ma'am. From January 12th, 2012 to January 15th of 2012, again, during 5 calls between the cell phones of Robert Bashara and Joe Gentz, the records indicate that Mr. Bashara's cell phone was utilizing towers in the Eugene, Oregon, and Salt Lake City, Utah markets.
So at least on 2 time periods, once a time period in December and a time period in January, the cell phone of Mr. Bashara was making contact with the cell phone of Mr. Gentz when the towers would indicate that Mr. Bashara was out of the state.
Correct.
Now, did you also have the occasion in analyzing the cell phone records of Mr. Gentz?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And did Mr. Gentz have a cell phone provider that also included his text messages?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you find a certain text message dated December 10th, 2011?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the time of, tell me about that sequence, that text message.
Yes, ma'am. On December 10th of 2011, Joe Gentz received a phone call from Robert Bashara's Verizon cell phone at 5:07 p.m. This call lasted 4 minutes and 29 seconds. The next 5 communication events from Joe Gentz's cell phone were text messages to another cell phone with a 302 area code. These outgoing text messages were all on December 10th, 2011, and started at 5:40 p.m.
And there was no intervening phone call or no intervening phone activity from the call that came from Mr. Bashara's cell phone. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And could you relate to the court the sum and substance of these text messages?
Well, Your Honor, I would object. That's hearsay.
We did this. This was one of the pretrial motions we had.
Oh, I agree. If we know who it is that's actually texting.
Who he's actually texting, how is that relevant?
No.
This is
for state of mind of Mr. Gentz, and we don't know if Mr. Gentz is texting.
That's a factual
That's
issue
the
that goes to
foundation.
weight. No,
the full foundation of this being something that can be admitted that is in fact hearsay. We don't know who texted these.
the fact that it's on his cell phone after the phone call from Mr. Bashara, the fact that it's made is relevant. Now, they can argue, if they want, factually, that it wasn't Mr. Gentz.
No, she has to prove this. We don't have to argue anything. She has to show us who it is that made these texts.
I believe their argument is foundational that phone that was used, but that it was Mr. Gintz that made the communication and text message.
I think the fact that they came from his phone is one link in the chain. We don't have to prove at this point that they came from Mr. Gintz. All we have to prove is that they came from his cell phone. It's circumstantial evidence.
You're trying to establish that it's Mr. Gintz's state of mind.
Correct.
So you have to establish that it's Mr. Gintz that made the text message. And given that it's Mr. Gintz's cell phone, is that enough? That it came from his cell phone to establish that it wasn't in fact Mr. Gintz that made it?
Authentication, when you look at the rules of authentication, is a very low threshold, and it's just all you have to do, present is something is what it purports to be. Under the Michigan rules of evidence, when you say a self-identification, if you pick up the phone and somebody says, "This is Joe," under the Michigan rules of evidence, that's sufficient. The fact that these are in his text messages and in a phone that he has used, and there's no evidence that anybody else used his phone, that goes to weight, not to admissibility.
But, Judge, the problem we have here is that the prosecutor is already seeking to use state-of-mind evidence, and we've already made the argument that it's simply not relevant. His state of mind is not relevant. The court made a ruling, we respect that. Right, but now we're at the point where we're going to take what is supposedly Gent's state of mind in these texts without any proof that he was the one that sent him. The only factor that ties anybody in it came from his number.
And I think that's sufficient.
And again, Judge, we still run into the issue of why.
I think you might have to, at a bare minimum, establish that the person that Mr. Gintz allegedly sent this text message to, testifying that they received the text message from Mr. Gintz, or Mr. Gintz saying that he sent the text message, if you're going to use that as state of mind.
Judge, and the person that
Mr. Gintz said it was state of mind. I'll sustain the judgment.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge.
But at any rate, well, let's do it this way. There was a series of text messages sent out from Mr. Gintz's phone right after a phone call from Mr. Bashara's phone.
Yes, ma'am.
And there was no interruption.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Now, did you likewise look at the cell phone records of Jane Bashara's cell phone?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And did you look specifically to the records that dealt with calls to and from her cell phone after 9 p.m. on 1/24/12?
Yes, ma'am. I did focus specifically on calls from 9 p.m. on January 24th through 9 a.m. on January 25th of 2012.
Okay. And could you tell me what were your findings there?
This revealed that by 9:25 p.m. on January 24th, that Ms. Bashara's phone interacted with a tower and sector that serviced the area where her body was discovered. And, of course, yes, by 9:25 p.m.
Now, did you review a taped interview of Mr. Bashara indicating that he had called Mrs. Bashara's cell phone over a dozen times that night searching for her?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did you find any phone records that would support Mr. Bashara's claim?
Absolutely not.
Could you tell us what you found?
What I found during that 9 p.m. on the 24th to 9 a.m. on the 25th, I found that Jane Bashara's Verizon phone received 91 incoming calls during that time and made no outgoing calls. During this time, of those 91 calls, only 4 of these calls were made by the Bashara's family home phone. 4 calls were made by the home phone. And 2 calls were made by Robert Bashara's cell phone.
So his interview when he said he had called her dozens of times searching for her, that did not show true?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Now, did you find a change in the phone usage pattern.
To 12. To sir, on that same date at 9:56 p.m., an incoming text read, home, sir. 20th at 8:29 a.m., an incoming text into Robert Bashara's phone read, good morning, sir. On that same date at 8:31 a.m., an incoming text read, I'm fine, sir.
Now, on the 20th, do you have outgoing texts back to that number?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And those are from Mr. Bashara's cell phone?
To the 541 cell phone.
Okay, and what was the text sent from Mr. Bashara's cell phone?
At 12:03 p.m., an outgoing text from Mr. Bashara's cell phone to the 541 cell phone read, Neil, and know you are mine.
Text message that was sent from Mr. Bashara's cell phone to that Oregon cell phone?
At 12:24 p.m., an outgoing text read, you can but feel my whip.
You can but feel my whip?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was from Mr. Bashara's cell phone to the Oregon cell phone?
Yes, ma'am.
And do we have 2 more days of good morning, sir type messages?
Yes, ma'am. On actually 3 more days, on January 20th of 2012 at 9:24 a.m., an incoming text into Mr. Bashar.
You mean the 21st?
The 21st? Mm-hmm.
Okay.
2012 at 9:24 a.m., an incoming text read, good morning, Robert Bashara initiated 65.
Were there any phone contact between these phones with Nancy Bashara's cell phone?
Yes.
Those phones are phones associated with Paul Monroe. Did you find evidence that there was phone contact between John Gifford, the private investigator that was employed by Mr. Bashara?
Yes, from April 27th, 2012 through July 29th, revealed that Monroe's home and cell phone had 28 calls to John Gifford. Of these calls, of these 28 calls, 14 were initiated by each party, by Mr. Monroe and Mr. Gifford.
Did Paul Monroe's phone records reveal phone calls to various tip lines, Crime Stoppers, and the like?
Yes.
Calls from Nancy Bashara's phone records?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Did her phone records likewise have some of the same phone numbers to the tip lines as Paul Monroe's phone?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
Specifically, did you check the cell sectors of Paul Monroe's phone in the month of June to find out whether Bob Bashara's cell phone was ever in Paul Monroe's home phone sectors during that time?
Yes, ma'am, I did conduct analysis of Paul Monroe's cell phone to was.
And what was that?
That prevalent cell sector, his most prevalent cell sector serviced the area of a residence on Oakman Boulevard in Detroit.
Okay, and that was the residential area of Mr. Paul Monroe?
Yes, ma'am.
Now let's specifically talk about June 20th, 2013, around 4:07. Is Mr. Bashara's cell phone hitting off that sector?
Yes, ma'am. On June 20th, during 3 calls between 4:07, Mr. Bashara's cell phone is utilizing a tower and
did you also do something that's called a tower frequency analysis?
Yes, I did.
And tell me about that. What is a tower frequency analysis?
Essentially, I'm looking at the number of times that a cell phone interacts with a tower in a sector. This can certainly provide some indication to investigators as to where a cell phone is used the most. And where a person lives, where a person works, and so that type of analysis is very helpful to investigators.
Did you do that with Mr. Bob Bashara's cell phone?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what did you determine his home sector was?
Determined that his home sector on the Verizon network was Tower 994, Sector 1.
And did you do the likewise with with Jane Bashara's?
Yes, I did.
And what was
sector was also on the Verizon network, Tower 994, Sector 1.
Of the body discovery site?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And tell me what that was.
As I testified earlier, as of 9:25 p.m., Ms. Bashara, Jane Bashara's cell phone had interacted with towers that service the area of where her body was discovered. During the time that I analyzed records for her phone, that was the only interaction that her phone ever had with that tower and that sector. Just previous to her body her phone interacted with a tower and a sector. Again, this was the only time that her phone interacted with that tower and that sector.
Did Joe Gintz's phone interact with that sector?
Yes, I took a look at the towers that were, again, in the area of where Jane Bashara's body was discovered. looking at Mr. Gentz's cell phone and looking at his cell towers, I was able to determine that his cell phone had been in that area previous to January 24th, 2012.
With some frequency?
Absolutely, with some frequency.
And was there someone else that Mr. Bashara contacted frequently that had contact with that cell sector?
Yes, ma'am. There was, in looking at Joe Gentz's cell records, he did have frequent contact with Robert Fick. Robert Fick, likewise, had previous interaction with cell towers and sectors in the area of where Jane Bashara's body was discovered.
And that is reflected in exhibit number 30, which I believe counsel will stipulate to?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I believe we have 30 stipulated to, 95, 96, and the other ones I've spoken of, except for the text message. Okay. Oh, and lastly, I think I said 27, which is the exhibit 27, the January 21st to the 24th. Nothing further of this witness.
I'm sorry, did you say exhibit 27?
Yes, exhibit number 27 is all the phone contacts for January 23rd and the 24th.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, sir.
How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you.
Special Agent Brew, you prepared one report with respect to all your analysis. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was submitted to the prosecutor's office, correct?
It was.
And how many total pages was that report?
8 written pages.
And as part of that report, you also submitted many, if not all, of the phone records that you've been testifying to?
Yes, sir, the spreadsheets and so forth.
Okay, sir, could I ask you to grab any one of the exhibits that have to do with the actual calls that were made, and because I need a little explanation of what each of those vectors within that diagram are, okay?
Okay.
You have one in front of you. Can you identify whatever one you're going to use?
The vectors?
Well, the sections on the...
Okay. I have People's 26 in front of me.
And how is that identified as what record, sir?
These are records Bashara to and from Gentz, January 21st through 24th, 2012.
Okay, I want to grab that and make sure we're on the same page.
Okay. People's 26. Bashara to and from Gentz, January.
Okay. Now, that exhibit is different than, there is another, I believe it's exhibit 28, where you have a highlight, and if I'm wrong, I thought I marked this 28. Highlighted call represents first contact between Gentz and Bashara. Do you see that document, sir?
I don't. I would need People's 28 to follow along.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had him up there. Still.
I have 26.
And I'm not certain this is 28, Mark, if you can identify. 24,
I have
I'm
24.
sorry.
Yes, I have 24
You do have
and
24.
26.
Now,
Yes.
when you look at the very top where the captions are, such as row number, target name,
Yes.
that is different than the Bashara to and from Gentz, correct? The top of the...
The columnar headings?
Right.
Okay.
Those are different, agreed?
No, sir. Row number, target name, date, time, duration, direction. There is sector information in People's 24.
Right. That is not present in the Bashara to and from Gentz exhibit, correct?
Correct, sir.
Now, can we assume then from that you've taken the Bashara to and from Gentz is information that you have taken from the ones that include the vectors?
Yeah, it's all taken from the same set of data.
Okay. But if you would then refer to People's 24,
Okay.
just as an example, it indicates on the top of those headings, and you pointed out the difference. First sector, second sector, correct?
First sector and sector, yes, sir.
Now, can you explain the significance, or would you explain to not only me but the court, what does first sector mean?
First sector is the tower and sector that the handset interacted with when the call began.
And second sector would be?
The end sector is the tower and sector that the handset interacted with when the call ended.
Is there any indication or any way of telling any other sectors that were involved during the course of a phone call?
The telephone companies do not report that information to domestic law enforcement.
Okay, great. Now, you indicated that you did an analysis of Mrs. Bashara's phone number, and is that, I think the prosecutor referred to it as a tower frequency analysis of some sort?
Who's
Mrs. Bashara?
Jane or Nancy?
I'm sorry, Jane Bashara?
Yes, sir.
And you indicated that at some point, that being 9:25, it was intersecting with a certain tower, correct?
Correct, sir.
That tower was located in the area of where her body was found, correct?
Correct, sir.
Now, you also indicated that prior to that, at some point, her cell interacted with a tower at 6 Mile and Gratiot.
Yes, sir.
That is a completely different tower than where the body was found, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
And you said that that tower at 6 Mile and Gratiot was one that Mr. Gentz, his phone, frequently interacted with, correct?
No, sir. The towers and sectors that I testified to that Mr. Gentz's phone interacted with were up near where her body was discovered.
Okay.
Yeah, not Gratiot and 6 Mile.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Was there any analysis done of Mr. Gentz's phone on the night that Jane Bashara was alleged to have been murdered?
Yes, sir, there was.
And is that contained within a report anywhere that you filed with, or that you provided to the prosecutor's office?
Those records specifically, I believe that my analysis of Mr. Gentz's phone on January 24th, I believe, yes, that information was provided to, if memory serves.
In the body of that same report?
Oh, this 8-page report? No, sir.
Okay, there's another report about the analysis of Mr. Gentz's phone?
Not another written report, but certainly, I mean, during the course of this, almost 2-year investigation, there certainly were reports and analysis conveyed to investigators and to prosecutors with respect to many facets of my analysis.
Do you recall a specific report, sir, detailing Mr. Gentz's, the cell, that whatever it is called, the frequency analysis with his cell phone on January 24th or January 25th?
I don't recall a specific report. I do recall the analysis, however.
You did that analysis, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you can't tell us what that is now? You don't know if it was reduced to writing?
It wasn't reduced in my 8-page written report, no, sir.
Well, you would agree with me, sir, that's fairly significant.
Objection, that question is argumentative. What's significant is the argumentative question. Thank you.
Would you agree that that analysis has some evidentiary value?
It could, determine based on the outcome of that analysis, the results of that analysis.
You have been a special agent how long, sir?
25 years.
And you've no doubt been involved in numerous investigations, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you had a suspect in an investigation, you would certainly want to know his whereabouts as they relate to a specific event, would you not?
Yes, sir.
And one of the ways that you would undertake that is to do the tower frequency analysis. Fair?
The tower analysis during a relevant time period. Yes, sir.
And it is your testimony that you did, in fact, do that analysis with respect to Mr. Gentz's phone.
Yes, sir, I did.
But you don't know whether you did a written report on that, is that?
I did not do a written report, and it is not contained within the written report that I testified to here today.
You have no doubt notes from your analysis of that information, correct?
Absolutely, and I'd love to share that with you.
I would appreciate that, sir.
Okay.
With respect to Mr. Bashara's telephone,
Yes, sir.
did you do the same type of analysis
As far as where the phone was?
on those dates? Yes.
My portion of, or my role in the investigation dealt with the pattern, the calling patterns of the certain phones, and one of my associates conducted the analysis with respect to the mapping or the location of the phones during that relevant time period.
And who was that colleague, sir?
Special Agent Christopher Hess from the FBI.
And did he prepare, to your knowledge, a separate report with respect to his findings?
In all,
Well,
he knows whether somebody else prepared a report. What does him knowing whether somebody else prepared a report? How is that possible?
thank you, Judge.
in all honesty, I don't know what Agent Hess prepared. He's with the FBI, and
Never the twain shall meet.
no, I don't know what he prepared. In all honesty,
Okay. Did you personally ever review any of his work with respect to whatever he may or may not have been doing?
yes, I did. I did have a chance to review some of his work, or see as he presented it to me, and other investigators.
And that was specifically with regard to positioning a phone in relation to where these cell towers are, correct?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you also mentioned that you were able to ascertain a specific sector or tower that was, for lack of a better term, a home tower for both Mr. Bashara and his wife Jane.
Yes, sir.
And that, I think you indicated, was Tower 994, Sector 1.
Yes, sir.
Do you know where that tower is by chance?
Yes, sir.
Is that in the Grosse Pointes?
It is not.
Are there any towers in the Grosse Pointes?
Absolutely.
And where would those be located, sir?
There's hundreds, possibly. I mean, the numbers would be, as far as all 5 companies that operate here in Michigan, they have, to provide service in a densely populated area like Southeast Michigan, the towers would be in the hundreds.
Okay. But I guess I was trying to be more specific. That Tower 994 is not in any of the Grosse Pointes, correct?
No, sir.
And that was their home tower?
Yes, sir.
Despite the fact, I think you just said, I don't mean servicing, I'm asking specifically if the tower is in Grosse Pointe, if there are towers in Grosse Pointe.
Yes, sir, there are towers in Grosse Pointe.
Okay, thank you. Now, is there, when you're doing your analysis, do you have a map that tells you where these towers are?
I have a map and also the list of cell towers that's provided by the phone companies in response to our legal demands.
So that means at any given time, if you have a document like Exhibit 24, where it lists first vector, whatever number is provided, you can turn around and find out where that tower is, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree with me that normally a cell phone's going to go to the nearest tower, to the nearest tower of that provider, normally?
Objection, he has to lay the foundation, and he can testify as to that.
Well, he's an expert, Judge. I'm asking him if he knows. If he doesn't,
In that particular area, you can ask him.
that's all. Do you know, sir?
No, you can ask him about his expertise in that particular
Well,
area.
in looking at your curriculum vitae, you've had specialized training with the Harris Corporation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was back in July of 2012.
Yes, sir.
That had to do specifically with cellular tracking and cell tower mapping, correct?
Correct, sir.
Is this the question that I asked you about what a cell phone might normally do? Does that have to do with your training, anything to do with your training?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you answer that question?
Absolutely, sir.
And your answer would be?
That while there is no complete rule of thumb, there is the overriding thought that a cell phone interacts with the closest tower. That's not always the case. And all networks are different. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Metro, Sprint, all construct their networks differently
Certainly.
to service the areas that they feel need the most service.
So you would agree then, as a general rule, the phone should go to the nearest tower of that provider.
Objection, that's a mischaracterization of what he said.
All right. If he disagrees.
I wouldn't say a general rule. Again, that is a misconception that it always goes to the closest tower, but a call does not always interact with
And
the
I didn't
closest
say
tower.
always, sir. I said generally, it's supposed to work that way, correct?
Objection, he can't I think the question is argumentative and it mischaracterizes what he says. He can't say what is, he testified about all the variables. He can't say that.
Well,
He can tell us whether or not he agrees or not.
Whether it's supposed to go to the closest tower, that actually is up to the network engineers at each company. I cannot testify as to how they are designing their networks.
okay. That's fair.
Yes.
Now, you indicated with respect to the cell sector where Jane Bashar's body was recovered that your analysis indicated that the body was left somewhere between 6:43 p.m. and 9:25 p.m. Is that accurate?
Correct, sir.
And the 6:43 p.m. time, I'm going to assume then that somehow you connected it to that vector at that point in time.
The 6:23 p.m. was when Jane Bashar's phone interacted with the tower that services the Gratiot and 6 Mile area.
Okay, and you indicated that it interacted with two towers, a tower 193, correct? Oh, I'm sorry. No, can you tell me what tower that might have interacted with at that point?
Yes, stand by. I'm referring to People's 23. Jane Bashar's body was discovered in an area that is serviced by Verizon Tower 42, Sector 2. At 6:43 p.m., Jane Bashar's Verizon phone interacted with Tower 323, Sector 2. That tower services the area of Gratiot and 6 Mile.
So between the time that her phone interacted with Tower 323, Sector 2, and the time that it acted with 42-2, are you showing any interaction whatsoever with any other tower?
No, sir. Those were the only two towers that were interacted with between 6:43 p.m. and 9:25 p.m.
And just so we are perfectly clear, Tower 323, Sector 2,
Yes, sir.
does that tower service the area where Mrs. Bashar's body was found?
No, sir, it would not.
Do you know from your analysis how far away that may have been? That particular tower?
Just from my knowledge of the area, I would know it would be in excess of a mile.
Now, going back to the headings that I first asked you about in 24, and I'm just going to ask you about the headings, sir. Did you do an analysis of Mrs. Bashar's phone in terms of first vector, end vector?
Yes, sir.
First vector and end vector.
Yes, sir, I did.
And can you tell us, with the interaction with Tower 42-2, what the first vector was and what the end vector was?
During all of the calls, as listed here on page 8, all of those calls began on 42.2 and ended on 42.2 of those 34 calls that were received by her phone on 9/24, beginning at 9:25 p.m.
And you indicated that your analysis, finally, in your final analysis, that the body was left somewhere between 6:43 and 9:25, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you can't be any more certain than that. Fair statement?
Any more certain?
Well,
Or
any more
precise?
definitive other than 643 to 925?
Based on the cell towers that her cell phone interacted with, that would be my opinion that that's when her body was placed in the area where it was discovered.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor? Very good. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
We'll take a 5-minute recess.
Yes. Okay. Correct.
Okay.
I do not. I can get it. I'll get it. Okay. All right.
And also, because I know Lance was here about but then there's this, somebody said,
Tabata. Spell it for you.
yes.
T-I-B-A-U. T-I-B. Tabata. Actually, it's like spell. T-I-B-A-U-T-A. There was David Stephan Zach. Rachel Gillette. That's the name. Rachel Constable. R-A-C-H-E-L-G-I-L-L-E-T-T.
Is R-A-C-H-E-L 12.
Just one.
Is that my person? Robert person?
Steve. We'll do it. Okay. We'll get to the CV too.
Yeah, just the
Okay. Harris, he said it's talking about Harris Corporation.
no, but even
Okay, we'll get it for you.